Well, thank you for having me on. Are we live now?
Yes, we are.
Is there anything specific you would like to start with?
Well, why don't you start out by I've had different people ask me the difference between the law as we know it and constitutional law. So that might be a good start if that's an easy enough question.
It's an involved, but let's see if I can get it put down so it's a lot more simple. What we know as the law is statutory. Statutory is admiralty or law of the sea, ocean law. What happened was when this ocean law or admiralty law, statutory law, took over something like 150 years ago, and we have had it to the point where we've always thought this to be normal. And of course, that's what they wanted us to believe, that this was normal, this was the law. But this was the law of the sea that was brought onto the land. Now, common law, which is constitutional law, is the law of the land, meaning that it is based on the Magna Carta, it is based on the Constitution, and it is based upon the state constitution. Now, every state is actually a nation unto itself, just like the nations in the European Union. Each state is a nation, but in order for each state as a nation to coexist and overcome problems of having to have different currencies, problems with passports and stuff, they formed a union, and that union is what created the federal government. Now, the problem is, in 1861, that federal government was trying to take away the sovereignty of the southern states, and therefore they withdrew from the Union. That is what caused the Civil War. Once the Union, or once the Confederate States were destroyed, because they lawfully withdrew. That was their prerogative. And they actually formed a new union of states called the Confederation. So the Northern Union went against the Southern Confederation, and we know the results of what happened there. Now, once that was taken over, there was no jurisdictional system implemented, and so that was when Admiralty came in and created and took over the jurisdictional system. And that is what we have today. Now, statutory law is, like I said, law of the sea, where essentially the judge is the captain of the ship. Now, if anybody understands how a ship operates, there is no higher authority. The captain is, in essence, a dictator on his ship, and that is required because of the safety and everything that goes on. So when you go into a statutory system, you are going essentially into a mini dictatorship. Now, statutory is based upon case law. It's based upon decisions made by other judges, whereas constitutional or land jurisdiction is, in essence, based upon the Constitution. If a law is repugnant to the Constitution, it cannot exist and cannot have force. Now, this actually brings us into a very good discussion that I would like to get into, and that is, where do we stand now with our judicial system? We are in a major crisis. The American people are ignorant or naive, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, because the American people have been so well programmed by the propaganda media, by the propaganda government schools programming all of us to believe certain principles and concepts, which are in fact false. Now, take for example, who controls America? Well, we have this idea and concept that, yes, we have a county commissioner, we vote on the county commissioner, and we put them into office. Then we vote on a judge, and the judge, we vote that judge into office, and so on and so forth up the food chain. But what you don't see is that everything is controlled by the attorneys and the Attorneys Guild. Now, this is known as the BAR, the British Accreditation Registry. Now, every attorney has the title of nobility called an esquire. Now, think about it. Why does all these lawyers, judges, politicians who are attorneys have titles British title. The original 13th Amendment that was ratified specified that no person with a title of nobility will be allowed to hold any public office. But now let's consider who's in the public office. The president's a lawyer. Most of his staff are lawyers. 80 or 90% of Congress are all lawyers. Look at your state. The governor. Most of the governors are lawyers. If you write a letter to your county commissioner or to somebody, you always get an answer back from a lawyer. So who controls the country? The lawyer. This should not be a surprise, but it should be a wake-up call, because those lawyers, their first oath is to the Lawyers Guild, not to the people of America, but to the Lawyers Guild. They say you cannot practice law without a license. Well, you ask for their license, and what do they show you? They show you a membership card to the Lawyers Guild. And so what we have lost is the understanding that our country has been taken over by the lawyers. Who creates the laws that the people supposedly have to obey? It is the lawyers. When you go to court, what happens when you hire a lawyer? Automatically, by the court, you are considered a incompetent, and therefore you are represented to the court, the statutory court, who has no interest in justice, but rather supporting the financial obligations of the Lawyers Guild. Now, somebody once told me that you have, statistically speaking, you have better chances in Las Vegas than you do have in a court getting a favorable win from your case, even if you are 100% correct. Because the courts are not about justice, the courts are about profit. Now, we have established that all of the courts in every section of the United States of America is a corporation, a for-profit corporation. Now, think about that. If you go into a corporate jurisdiction, are they going to be concerned about your rights? In fact, if you even bring up the Constitution, they'll throw you in contempt of their court, because the Constitution is land-based, not sea-based. Therefore, they can get away with it, even though they file a oath of office for supporting the Constitution. They don't tell you which Constitution. There are multiple constitutions. There is the Land Jurisdiction Constitution, and there is the Sea Admiralty Constitution. That's my term, by the way. And I should also point out that everything I say here is my opinion, just for those government officials that may be listening. So what we have is a complete and absolute takeover of the whole political system. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. You are choosing from the Lawyers Guild selection of who your master is going to be. Whether it's a Republican master or a Democrat master, it doesn't matter, because it is all controlled by the Lawyers Guild. Now, if we look at the situation over at Burns, you will find the imprint of all the lawyers. For example, the criminal actions, in my opinion, of Governor Kate Brown, who is a lawyer, was very much behind all of the BLM actions in stealing, using coercion, and terrorizing the ranchers and the people of Burns. Now, they've pulled out at this point somewhat, but think about it for a minute. Now, the federal government has no jurisdiction within any of the sovereign states, none whatsoever. They have only jurisdiction within the corporate area of Washington, D.C., 10 square miles. That's it. They have no constitutional jurisdiction for even the BLM or the FBI or the DHS or any other three-letter corporations to even exist, let alone come in and take with immunity the land of the people. Right now, the BLM, Forestry Service, and so forth all claim over 50% of all the land in the West. That's 50%. And this land is sovereign territory unto each state. They have no constitutional jurisdiction. They have no constitutional ability to do that. Yet, the lawyers have manipulated the system to make it look like they do. And now we have the Bundys, which stood up, ranchers who stood up with the Constitution in their hand and said, you are wrong. You do not have the authority to take control of land in this state. Lavoy Finicum did the same thing. He was pretty much one of the primary people that was teaching the other ranchers that the BLM has no constitutional right to claim the control that they are. And he was making a lot of headway. He was convincing more and more ranchers and other people that we live by the land constitution, not the sea. The sea is basically pirates on the land. Now let that sink on. The judicial system, the lawyers, and everything we always were taught to think of as proper and normal is nothing more than pirates from the sea. Now there's going to be a lot of people that will take a second look at this and say, hold on, wow, that's not what I know. That's not what I think. Of course not, because you have been programmed, you have been taught your whole life to think exactly what they want you to think. You see, common law of the land, was given to us and implemented by the Magna Carta. This is old law, over 800 years old. This is the law of the people, not the law of the lawyers or the law of the corporation, but the people. Now, what does that mean? To understand, it goes pretty much against everything you think and believe is normal. Let me give you an example. A good example here is what makes a judge in the statutory system. I researched this out in Oregon. I'm in Oregon, and I looked back to the laws that says, okay, we vote, at least in the counties, for our own judges. And every time the judge comes up for election, it's always the same group of judges. The exact same one. And this made me curious, because why is it always the same one? If they're criminals and they're corrupt, which is obvious, all you have to do is talk to anybody who's been through a mortgage dispute or a ticket from beating or something, which in itself is criminal, that you have the right to travel in your private capacity without being impeded by the lawyers' guild. But getting back to the judges, I looked and started going through the statutes. And the statute says, unless you have a lawyers' guild membership card, you cannot be a judge. Now, this seems awfully odd, because then what makes a lawyers' guild member? Well, you have to go through a lawyers' guild training facility or college. You have to take the oath to the bar, the oath to the lawyers' guild, that you will support them above all others. And then you go through your career, and then you are selected, essentially, at the higher levels, the judges are selected by other lawyer guild members. I hope you're seeing the pattern here.
Yeah.
The lawyers guild is creating their own elite system of nobility that has control of the government, that has control of the jurisdiction. They are the ones that protect the bankers that created the fiat banking system that does nothing more than steal the wealth and the human resources from the American people. Now, this is not